I remember in 2009 when I was, in the halls, a student was on his device and he proceeded to run. I ran after him. And when I caught up with him, he gave me the device and then he thanked me for creating a jail at what should be a school.
Welcome again to the podcast. I'm your host, Manal Zainuddin. This podcast highlights education communities from macro and micro angles. It's about leadership, learning, personal and professional growth, stories, interviews, talks, projects, and more coming up from around the globe. I always extend through this podcast Plutarch's famous quote, "The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled." Today we are having a disruptive talk, and it's my favorite type of talk because it cracks open the normal nutshells, those rigid walnut shells that continue to hide the brilliance of our minds. And this type of talk exposes the kernels and the depth that is often unnoticed deep inside the foldings. And the best speaker in this context is our guest today. Our guest is someone who dares to crack open fixed mindsets and delve deep into the unfamiliar with action, not only with talk. And this is what drew my attention to his work, because I do value challenging the status quo, asking questions, and allowing the voice of the strong and the vulnerable inside of us. Our guest today is an innovator in education, award-winning thought leader, and currently the CEO of Aspire Change Edu, a collaborative consultancy. He is a keynote speaker, a best-selling author, and above all, and this is what I like much, he is the designer of amazing posters and models supporting his award-winning blog. Eric Sheninger, I'm thrilled to have you today.
Oh man, that was like one of the best introductions ever. I am really excited to be here. It's an honor to kind of share some insights that are, have the ability to transform education for the better.
Thank you. And the thrill is mine as well. I'm very excited. I always like to start with the guest talking about the progression in his journey. And in your case, Eric, it is astounding because it comes from a different mind, a mind that dared to discover its strengths and change. And now you are helping schools from all over the world to dare to discover their strengths as well. So could you share your journey with us?
Yeah, what is, I guess, somewhat interesting is that I didn't believe in any of this. I was the epitome of a fixed mindset. I wrote the policies to ban social media in my school system. We prohibited student devices, and we really tried to create a culture of conformity and compliance where all students were doing the same thing at the same time, the same way. And, we all change for a variety of reasons, most notably when we see the value in doing things differently and better, or we're pushed outside our comfort zones. So for me, I kind of had a convergence of those two phenomena. I remember in 2009 when I was, in the halls, a student was on his device and he proceeded to run. I ran after him. And when I caught up with him, he gave me the device and then he thanked me for creating a jail at what should be a school. That was the first inclination that my actions weren't really in the best interests of those who I was tasked with serving, my students. So that weekend I read a newspaper article, and that article was about Twitter. And I swore I would never be on social media, and because I didn't see the value. But as I read the article, the light bulb went on. I saw a connection to my professional practice, and that is communication. You will not find an effective teacher, leader, who's not an effective communicator. So I got on social media to be a better communicator, and then I lurked, and I learned through social media spaces how far behind our school was. I learned that I, as the principal, was the inhibitor to change. And it was those two moments, a moment of seeing value and a moment of becoming uncomfortable, that I decided to learn how to unlearn and relearn, and the rest is history. In 2009, my school was the first one to go bring your own device 14 years ago. Flipped, blended, personalized. We were doing that all 13 years ago. We did so many innovative things, but we improved achievement in the process. And it got to the point where we were winning awards. New York City media was coming to do stories on us, and people visited from all over the world. And those visits led to my transition to what I do now, supporting school systems across the globe with how do we fundamentally improve teaching, learning, and leadership through a research and evidence-based lens.
Well, I was right when I said it would be astounding, because you said it in the perfect way. I was the inhibitor of those practices. Imagine the convergence here and how amazing it is when we realize where we stand and when we decide to take action. And that is amazing. Eric, you are an author of 8 books on learning and leadership. And what I find different in your content is that you are walking side by side with the changes taking place in the world of education, if not to say you are exceeding the pace. And you just said that you started working on all this like 10 years ago or even more. So you wrote in 2017 with Trish Rubin, Brand Ad, Tell Your Story, Build Relationships, and Empower Learning. Learning transformed 8 keys to designing tomorrow's schools today, authoring the book with Thomas Murray also in 2017, and then Digital Leadership in 2019, and the latest, Disruptive Thinking in Our Classrooms, Preparing Learners for Their Future in 2021. And I think this latest book is the solid ground for all others because it outlines thinking itself. Thinking is the core of teaching, learning, leadership, and even now digital transformation. And you divide the book into parts for rethinking. And this is what I liked the most. We are rethinking, and you name them like rethinking the normal, rethinking the learning, rethinking the learner, rethinking our mindset. And you divide their chapters to insights. And what I like also is the disruptive challenge, number 1, number 2, depending on so it is the perfect presentation of such a complex theme, if we may say. It's like the skeleton, muscles, and skin, figuratively speaking. So tell us more about how disruptive thinking can create disruptive thinkers.
Yeah, and I think it's important to look at the world today. And I mean, not even today, we've all been influenced by disruptive changes. I think for many of us, the most disruptive change was the rise of the internet, where we went from a world that wasn't really connected to one that we can learn anytime, anywhere, with anyone we want. And True. We're now looking at, the technology has been probably one of the biggest disruptive forces. But the pandemic might have been the most dramatic force to disrupt our society. So, as we look at all this change, we can't get focused on the event or technology, but we can look at how our actions are leading to outcomes that are going to future-proof learning for students now and well into the future. What do I mean by that? It relies on our ability. I define disruptive thinking as the ability to replace conventional ideas with innovative solutions to authentic problems. The pandemic, an authentic problem. We could look at global climate change. There's so many things we could look at, but what's happening right now before our eyes so fast? Probably the most disruptive force right now impacting education, artificial intelligence. So True. It really empowers us to reflect on, not what we do, but why do we do things the way we do them? How might we do it better? And what tells us if we're successful? And disruptive thinking isn't about doing things radically different. It's about how are we scaffolding our questions and our tasks? How are we building better assessments? How are we personalizing the learning experience where all students get what they need, when and where they need it to succeed? How are we looking at data and using data as a great foundation to group, regroup, target instruction, differentiate? How are we supporting learners that need the most help, but also providing tasks for those students that are already at standard or beyond? So it really looks at this sort of not balance, but a purposeful use of high effect strategies, technology, research that leads to evidence of, hey, you know what? Our learners are able to think. Our learners can apply their learning in relevant and meaningful ways aligned to real world problems that might have more than one solution. So is any of this new? No, technology's new. The strategies are the same. The research base has been around for a long time. What we have to work on is being honest about where we are in order to get to where our learners need us to be.
This is amazing. And I think you mentioned very important points. Although they may seem simple questions, but they hit the core of the entire thing. We have certain concerns that have always been there, but at the same time, we have ways out by scaffolding, for example. So that's, again, brings us to a critical question, especially amid all the plethora of resources available now with the internet. So how do you think we can evaluate relevance of what we are using?
Yeah, I think we have to be critical consumers first and foremost. Just because we can access something online, just because it's churned out by AI, just because Siri, Alexa, or Google search, point out information, it doesn't mean it's valid. And I think that really comes down to being astute when it comes to what are those effective strategies that we know have been found to get success in the classroom. And I think we got to really focus on building better lessons, clear alignment to the standards, explicit teaching, and then moving from instruction, what the teacher does, to learning what the kids do, and really looking at the pedagogical pathways that maximize time. I get to visit thousands of classrooms here in the United States and across the world. And I typically see the same thing in terms of areas for growth. The number one area for growth is how we maximize the time that we have with our students in class in order to meet their needs. And a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to do that. Finding a worksheet online that might be low-level thinking is not going to do it. Having them all use a digital tool at the same time, the same way, is not going to cut it. So it really comes back to that being critical to consumers, evaluating what we're pulling online, and making sure that it is going to directly support or enhance the concepts that we are working on with our students.
I certainly echo all what you have just said. We really have to raise the baseline and maximizing our experiences and our strengths, working on asset-based approaches. But, we always hear those phrases that this is difficult to do, we do not have the right time. So we hear and witness barriers that make sometimes the practice difficult, such as curriculum standards, mandates, standardized testing. So how do you think can we navigate through these constraints with more practical tools?
Yeah, well, I think first off, excuses are what hold us back. If it's important to you, you'll find a way. If not, you'll make an excuse. That's human nature. And time is the number one excuse. I challenge people to truly reflect on, are they using the time they have in a valuable way? And when it comes to change, it's typically the smallest shifts in practice that lead to the most dramatic results. And when I think about technology per se, maybe you're using technology to create engaging hooks in the beginning of the lesson. Maybe you're using technology to create a self-graded exit ticket that will inform whether or not the lesson was successful or if a reteach is needed the next day. Maybe technology is used in alignment with a review of prior learning, a check for understanding to involve all learners. So I think it really comes down to the tenets of how do we best engage students in learning? And let's look at our lesson design and facilitation, and then we can begin to look at select tools and resources that allow students to learn in ways they couldn't without it. And I think there's two driving questions when I work with educators across the world when it comes to digital. Number one, how are students using tech to learn in ways they couldn't without it? Number two, how does the use of technology by the adult represent a fundamental improvement over what was done in the past without the technology? If we can't answer those questions, we should not be using tech. And we don't want it to be a direct substitute for the low-level ineffective practices that we say we're going to move away from. So, I think too is, the mental blocks that we put on ourselves. It's going to be so much more time to plan. It's going to be so much more time to do this and that. But coming back full circle to saying, how do I know my students are learning? Where is the level of thinking? How did I meet the diverse needs of my learners? How is technology leveraged in a purposeful way to involve all students, unlock potential? So with any type of practice that we're grappling with, questions are more important than answers. And for all the listeners, I really encourage you to think about the questions you're asking related to your practice and let those questions drive not really answers, but potential solutions to grow.
This is the core of metacognition.
Hey, good teaching is good teaching. Learning is learning. Leadership is leadership.
Yes, and you just mentioned leadership, and that was a very interesting point. We're talking always about classes, teachers, and learners. What do you think is the role of leaders? Because leaders are those who will pave the way, who will give the green light, who will just make the school learning community scalable in ways or another.
Leadership isn't telling people what to do. It's taking them where they need to be. And what do teachers tell me they want? They want leaders who model the way, who provide timely, practical, specific feedback. They are empowered by leaders who actually lead the professional learning, who can effectively communicate, who can help work to create a shared vision that is getting input from teachers, students, community members. They want people that don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And it's very important for leaders to have a firm understanding of what truly constitutes effective pedagogy in 2024 and beyond. They need leaders to understand the role of data and being able to illustrate how data can be used in either professional learning communities or can be used to set up rotational models, choice activities, playlists, flipped classrooms. Those are all personalized examples of pedagogy that really focus on where students need extra support and where they can actually get a further degree of challenge. So, we think about leadership as a lot of management. And I think the shift is more from being a manager to an actual leader. And again, I think that what I always hear is don't ask others to do what you're not willing to do or have not done yourself. And I think also as leaders, no leader is going to have all the answers. I know I didn't. I still don't have all the answers. But effective leaders are able to do the following. They're able to admit when they don't know, and they're able to advocate for themselves when they need help. I don't know, I need help are signs of strength. And those attributes work in turn to inspire, empower, and motivate staff to take those risks, to try new things, and to get outside their own comfort zones.
This is brilliant. You put it in the perfect way, actually, when it comes to leaders, because it's true that they are the role models and they don't have to know everything. So they can consult experts, but they can, at the end of the day, they can facilitate the entire process.
Exactly. And that is the key.
Eric, we mentioned technology in our talk, but for those who don't know, you are also a Google certified innovator and tech expert. Now, you mentioned artificial intelligence, and now we're also moving towards regenerative artificial technology. There is no doubt that technology is serving education, but in what direction do you think is it taking us? And are there any red flags do you see in this?
Oh, there's always red flags. I'm not going to sit here and say that everything is all utopian, but I think the red flags are, hey, technology is not a silver bullet. Technology is not going to transform teaching and learning leadership. Teachers and leaders who use technology effectively, they are the ones that will transform education. And I think the red flags is this, when I walk into classrooms, I don't want to see students on tech from start to finish. I want to see them talking. I want to see them solving problems. I want to see them collaborating. So I think some of the red flags is just thinking that if we put students on a device, that they're automatically going to learn. They're not. And I also think that we have to, again, look at how we structure our tasks, build in accountability for learning, so that when students are using tech, they're using it in a purposeful way. I also think that, we have to become more trained in, what does effective use look like, and that's where I find that a lot of the fear and apprehension when it comes to technology is that people just haven't had the appropriate training that's aligned to research and evidence. So I think we have to be careful of, even in today's world with phishing scams, stealing identity, all that stuff. How the red flag is, are we teaching this to students? Are we actually training our staff on these elements? So I think with anything, the red flags are overuse and underuse. But I really begin to, as I work with more and more schools, it's how do we build that sound pedagogical foundation? And how do we expose educators to the most effective tools that are going to help not only engage learners, but free up their time so that they can use it to support those students in class that desperately need that assistance.
This is so insightful and awesome. Thank you so much, because you also stirred up some confusion and limitations when it comes to technology. There are lots of misconceptions, and you talked about that perfectly. Thank you so much, Eric. With this disruptive talk, we can't but keep asking questions, I think. And in my opinion, we can't but express excitement and enthusiasm, if we may say exclamations, for what our minds can do when we have the right tools. And I very excitedly from this platform encourage all educators and leaders to read Eric's books, starting with Disruptive Thinking, and check the blog posts, because it is a solid proof that we can disrupt education with the right tools, when there is the willingness to do so, when there is a true understanding and a sense of collaboration, we can do that. And Eric, you will be in the Middle East, I think, in May, right?
Yes, I'll be in Dubai working with a series of schools, and possibly I am talking to a school in Saudi Arabia, so I might be there for a day. But yes, very excited to come and work with schools on leadership and personalization this May.
This is a great opportunity for all leaders and educators. Thank you again for your time and contributions, Eric.
My pleasure.
As on our podcast, we end with the open-ended question from our guest. And our guest today, like mentioned, disruptive thinker and innovator, speaker and author, Eric Sheninger. Eric?
How will you effectively prepare learners for a world that we cannot predict?